Hello and welcome to the worship service of Talbott Cumberland Presbyterian Church.
We're on the campus of Carson Newman University. The plan is that this fall, students will return to campus.
It's not exactly certain what this fall will hold for students and faculty, but one thing is for certain. Students will face the challenge of quizzes and tests.
Now, many of us have experienced tests and quizzes in the classroom setting, but most of our tests occur in the course of our everyday lives. This Sunday, we're going to be reflecting upon a test of one of the patriarchs of our faith, Abraham, a very difficult test.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. But we never can prove the delights of His love until all on the altar we lay. For the favor He shows and the joy He bestows are for them who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey.
We face difficult challenges in our lives, and our lives are oftentimes filled with tests.
All the children in our country have to take standardized tests each year. In our state, it's called the TCAPs. And as children grow older, they have to take driver's examinations, and then they have to take SAT or ACT tests in order to enter college. There are all kinds of tests.
And then, once we go into the career field, we have to take tests and examinations to get certain jobs.
Carolyn Clark remembers a difficult challenge that she faced in her employment.
When I was working as a nurse in occupational health at a plant in Morristown, I had to do training, and speaking in front of a large crowd has always been hard for me. So that's one of the hardest things I've had to do. And that's easy for some people, but it's not for me.
There are lots of kinds of tests in our lives, and this is a list of the top 5 most difficult tests in the world. The All Souls Prize Fellowship exam conducted by Oxford University awards just 2 coveted fellowships each year. It requires candidates to write essays based on just a single word. The IIT is a nightmare engineering exam for hopeful engineers in India. More than 500,000 students take the exam every year, but only a few thousand make it. The National College Entrance Exam in China takes 9 hours to take, and it's required for higher education. Nearly 10 million candidates appear every year, and only 0.2% score high enough to get into top colleges. The Union Public Service Commission exam in India is used to recruit various types of government workers. It has 3 levels and takes several months, and it concludes with an interview, and less than 0.4% of people succeed. The Master Sommelier Diploma exam is for expert winemakers and includes a blind taste test where students must identify the type of grape used for a wine, the year that it was grown, and the region in which it was grown, just by tasting. Only 200 people have passed that exam in the last 40 years.
These are difficult exams, to be sure, but sometimes the most difficult tests in our lives are what we encounter during the course of our everyday lives. We face moves and illnesses. We face challenges to our physical health, to our mental well-being, to our spiritual lives. Sometimes we have ethical dilemmas. Sometimes characteristics of our personhood are challenged, like, do we have integrity? Do we have willpower? Do we have the strength to do what needs to be done in a difficult situation? You know, Abraham faced the most difficult test that a parent can face. He was asked to sacrifice or to kill his son. Now, sometimes parents glibly say, in a joking way, "He wrecked my car, I'm gonna kill him." Or, upon returning home after a long weekend, they find their house trashed and they say, "Oh, we're gonna kill that daughter of ours."
But of course, most parents would never do anything to endanger their children. So this story in which Abraham is called to sacrifice his son, it really runs counter to human nature. The text from Genesis, the 22nd chapter, begins, "Sometime later, God tested Abraham." Now, how much later was this? Well, we know that Isaac must have been a young man. At the end of the journey, Isaac carries firewood for his father. So some scholars estimate he was 14 or perhaps much older than that. And this was a test then, not only of Abraham's faithfulness, but also of Isaac's faithfulness. And testing is part of what happens in the Bible. We know in the story of the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness, Deuteronomy 8 says this, "Remember the long way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, in order to humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments." Just like the children of Israel, Abraham was tested. The readers of Scripture knows he was tested, and yet for Abraham, this was life. This was his life unfolding before him. And how did he respond to this test? In the passage, Abraham says, "Here I am." So God summons Abraham with an invocation of his name, and Abraham, this old patriarch, responds, "Here I am." This is a response that he gives later on when Isaac is speaking to him. And then in verse 11, he responds in the same way when the angel stays his hand. This response, "Here I am," is used throughout the Old Testament. Later on in the book of Genesis, Jacob responds to God's calling, "Here I am." And then in Exodus, Moses responds in the same way, "Here I am." And in 1 Samuel, Samuel himself responds to God's calling, "Here I am."
The meaning of the word "here I am" is ready, that he was ready to do whatever God wanted him to do, that he was listening and attentive to God's calling. I wonder in our own lives, are we ready when God calls us to do something? Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac." These horrifying instructions are given to Abraham in this Hebrew sentence that builds to Isaac's name. And over the course of the centuries, the rabbis through the Midrash have developed this dialogue between God and Abraham that reflects Abraham's reticence.
God says, "Abraham, take your son."
And Abraham responds, "I have 2 sons."
"Your only son."
And Abraham responds, "Each son is the only son of his mother."
"Who you love," God says.
And Abraham responds, "Is there any limit to affection?"
Isaac.
Leaving no doubt whom God was referring to in this command.
Then God tells Abraham that he will take him to a place that he will show him. It's the same place as in chapter 12 when he was called to leave his land. It's the place we now know as Temple Mount or the Dome of the Rock. God leads Abraham there. How was Abraham feeling at the time? What was he thinking? Probably anguish of a father or confusion of a person who had waited so long for a child, or expectant, not surprised, at ease, because in the context of his culture in Ur of the Chaldees, other places throughout the Middle East, child sacrifice was one way in which they represented their devotion to the gods. Or assurance, knowing that God had provided for him in his life, and he would even resurrect Isaac if necessary. I wonder if he told Sarah, and if he did, how would she have responded? He probably didn't seek her insights or thoughts on the matter. But regardless, the scriptures tell us this. He got up early the next morning. Abraham immediately obeys. This silence is in striking contrast to his response to God's condemnation of Sodom. When God condemns Sodom, Abraham pleads for the guilty and innocent of that city. But here, in this case, Abraham immediately obeys. There is a theological point. For himself, he says nothing and follows the duty and calling of God. But for others, he risks divine retribution by pleading with God. There's an important point to be made. Courage.
One day there was a college professor who went into her classroom, and it was an exam day, and she said, I only have one question, and I'll write it on the board. And so she turns around and writes on the board the words, "What is courage?" And so the students all open up their blue books, and they start writing fast and furiously, except for one student who just wrote 3 words on it. And she closed her book and turned it back into the professor. Everyone wrote for the rest of the hour. And when they got their test back, this student that had only written 3 words got an A. Everybody else wondered, what were the 3 words that she wrote? And the words were, "This is courage." It takes a lot of courage to write just 3 words on a blue book exam. It takes action to have real courage, right? You can believe something, but to actually go do it, that takes real courage. And that is what Abraham did. He got up early the next morning, he packed his donkey, he gathered up Isaac and 2 servants, and they took this 3-day journey all the way to the Mount of Moriah, which is now known as the Temple Mount. And there he told the servants, we will go over there, we will worship, and then we will come back to you. Now, he probably knew that they would interfere, but here's the question. Was he telling the truth? We will go over there, we will worship, and we will come back to you? Well, many scholars suggest that the way this is written does not have to be read always in the future singular sense, like we will, but perhaps maybe it could be read, let us go over there, let us worship, and let us come back to you. Or even, may we return to you. And so the idea is that Abraham believes and he is hoping that God will provide and that he won't actually have to sacrifice his son Isaac, but that God will provide for him. And so in the same way, when his son Isaac asks him, where is the lamb that we'll be sacrificing? Abraham replies, God himself will provide a lamb, in the hopes that God will provide a lamb and perhaps Isaac's life won't have to be sacrificed at Abraham's hand.
Abraham and Isaac went off together, Isaac carrying the wood, Abraham carrying the knife and the fire. And remember that Isaac is a young man. He's 14, 15, older than that. And Abraham is a very old man. It wouldn't be as if Abraham could easily have bound Isaac if he resisted. So this was Isaac's mission too. This was Isaac's calling and testing too. And Abraham binds Isaac and prepares for this act. And all of a sudden, he hears the words, Abraham, Abraham. The angel of the Lord calls to him twice. This is indicative of the divine intervention at that moment. And a lamb is provided. And Isaac is rescued. And Abraham has passed the test.
Seeing that he was willing, God stops him from the slaughter. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Fear is often defined as the reverence of God or the worship of God or awe in the presence of God, that we fear God in awesome wonder. And yet fear can also mean fear that when we're asked to give up what is most important to us, we experience fear. I wonder how Isaac felt. I wonder if he leapt off that altar and ran away as he watched his father go to get that ram from the thicket and to bring it forward and to sacrifice it on the altar in his stead. You know, in our lives, sometimes we're caught up in the testing of other people, that our lives are interwoven with the tests of other people, and what they experience impacts us significantly as well. We don't understand the origins of the tests that we encounter. Whether someone else might be going through a test, and then that puts us through our own testing situation. Or maybe the test is unique to ourselves. We don't understand God's ways. They're inscrutable, meaning we can't understand what God might be doing. And like Abraham, we don't have privy to the narration of our lives. Like at the beginning of the chapter, it says, and sometime later, God put Abraham to the test. We don't know in our lives if the script would read, and sometime later, God put Karen to the test. Or, and sometime later, God put Mark to the test. The one thing we do know is that we all face tests, that is a part of the human condition, that each one of us faces challenges and difficulties that put us to the test.
The question is, are we prepared for a test? Do we have the belief system and values in place so that we are prepared even for a challenging and dark time of testing? We don't know what Abraham thought was going to happen to Isaac, but we do know that Abraham never deviated from this call of God. And so the same question comes to us. Are we prepared for a time of testing? Have we put in place the patterns of life that will allow us to live out our faith even in the most challenging and difficult times? Are we able to say, like Abraham did, ready, that we're prepared? Are we able to answer questions like Abraham did for his son Isaac? Remember, Abraham says that God will provide. In fact, when Isaac asked him, "Where is the lamb?" Abraham answers, "God will provide the lamb." Perhaps this could have been a convenient way to put off answering Isaac's question, but more likely, it was indicative of Abraham's deep sense of faith, that God would provide, that Abraham trusted God. It's just like the words of the song say, "Trust and obey, for there's no other way." In difficult times, we have our character tested, our values tested, our very belief systems tested. But when we go through dark and challenging times, we can learn important lessons, and those lessons can benefit our faith and can benefit the faith of others.
In her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, Barbara Brown Taylor addresses the value and the importance of learning things through the difficult challenges of our lives. She says, "I have learned things in the dark that I could never have learned in the light, things that have saved my life over and over again, so that there is really only one logical conclusion. I need darkness as much as I need light." Testing can teach us wonderful lessons about ourselves and about God. And as Christians, as we learn to depend upon God, we become better and able to help other people as they walk through the challenging points of their lives. And as a church, we can become a haven for people who are walking through dark times in their lives. In the book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, the author says, so many congregations are preoccupied with keeping the lights on right now that the last thing they want to talk about is how to befriend the dark. But what a gift it is that we as Christians, as we learn to walk in the dark and we learn to survive those difficult tests, that we are able to help other people in their difficult situations. And so may we, as we face these difficult challenges in our own lives, these tests that we are sure to encounter, In these times when we feel that God is not answering our prayers, especially the way we would like, that we might be empowered to know God's presence and to help other people know God's presence through difficult times.